1 in 3 Texans will suffer domestic violence in their lifetime, but a Lubbock prosecutor says most accusers are unwilling to speak out against their abusers.
KCBD News Channel 11's Brittany Crittenden joins us with the dangerous cycle that can leave victims feeling trapped and the tools available to help set them free. Brittany.
Karen and Abner, the Texas Council on Family Violence, reports 161 Texans were killed by their intimate partners last year. 2/3 of those offenders in those cases had a history of violence. Along with speaking to the Lubbock District Attorney's Office about that cycle of abuse, we heard from a survivor who was able to break through.
But really it was just living in torture.
Just 7 weeks after Amy Tidwell met Courtney Gage in 2019, they were engaged. With 2 young girls, she had some reservations about moving in with him months later.
But he has this way of either throwing a fit and making you feel guilty or like a terrible person. And anyway, we did move in with him.
She says only 2 weeks later, the physical abuse began.
He beat the crap out of me on our wedding night. He strangled me in the bathroom floor, shoved me up against the cabinet. He threw me in the bathtub that was full of water. He hit me upside the head several times.
She says that abuse became cyclical, and as much as she wanted to leave, her shame and breaking up her family kept her in the relationship.
So with abuse, it's not just physical, and there's a psychological aspect to it. There's also a phenomenon called trauma bonding that abuse, that's what it does to your brain. It kind of changes the chemicals and it makes it almost feel like an addiction.
Tracy Wisely, an assistant district attorney for Lubbock, says that's what makes domestic violence cases unique.
Abusive relationships are about control, manipulation, emotional manipulation, isolation, might be financial dependence. It might legitimately be fear. You know, he might have physically abused them to the point where they really do think he will kill them if they try to leave, which is a possibility, or they believe it's a possibility.
Stephen Garcia with Women's Protective Services of Lubbock calls domestic violence a black eye on our area. The agency serves 12 counties, making up about 2% of the state's population. But 13% of the domestic violence cases reported statewide are from the South Plains. Wisely says the Lubbock County office sees these cases every week, but most victims are reluctant to testify.
You know, most victims of crime very much want to work with law enforcement. They want justice. They are willing to talk to us. Domestic violence victims sometimes will be in that situation, but very often they are still in an active relationship with their abuser, or they share children with their abuser.
She says the county does what it can to keep accusers safe through the prosecution process, whether through a protective order or strict conditions of bond placed on the offender.
And we will walk a victim through the process as well. If she is willing to work with us and willing to come testify, we will walk her through what we expect the questions to be. We have court investigators that can walk her to and from her vehicle. Courthouse security obviously is available. So we do try to make it as safe as possible.
While you don't have to have pending criminal charges to get a protective order, Wisely says you will have to prove abuse happened. Any documentation of alleged instances can become crucial pieces of evidence.
Ideally, you're calling the police every single time. We know that doesn't happen. But if something happens and a bruise develops, if you can document that, document the date, you know, even keep your own notes, your own journals, keep your own medical records, be honest with your healthcare providers, all of those kinds of things.
The DA's office encourages victims to testify.
Abuse never gets better. I'm not going to say people can't change, but abusers tend not to. And so once you start seeing those red flags, the first time it gets physically violent, that's when you need to leave.
Amy told herself she would the next time. In late 2020, she says Gage choke-slammed her and gave her a concussion. She reported it to law enforcement the next day.
And I finally realized that the pain I was feeling in the idea of leaving, I was going to keep going through that over and over again until I left for good.
In April 2022, Gage entered into a guilty plea for continuous violence against the family. He was placed on 8 years of community supervision. But then in January, a new accuser, Ashley, came forward.
2.5 hours later, I was at home and Courtney was strangling me, and I thought that I was going to die.
After 3 victims testified in court, including Amy and Ashley, Gage was sentenced to 7 years in prison for violating that community supervision.
And we're sitting there waiting for justice to finally be served. He gets sentenced to 7 years in prison, and it's a relief. And then, not 15 minutes later, he walked out of that courtroom just like we did.
Gage was let out on an appeal bond, and just 1 month ago, he was arrested again and charged for a separate assault. Both women we talked to claim the justice system has not done everything it can to help protect them. We'll hear more from them and have the recent result from a Terry County judge in Amy's case when we continue this investigation next week. Karen and Abner.
Thank you, Brittany.